medical oversight so profound it bordered on the impossible. Chapter 3: The Facts from Sacramento. Grief is a heavy thing, but for Rick D'Alessandro, it was sharpened by a growing, jagged suspicion. He couldn't sleep. He kept seeing John's sallow face. How could a doctor miss this? A medical student in their first week would have recognized the signs of diabetes. The thirst, the weight loss, the dry mouth. It was a textbook case. Rick began to look at his boss differently. He noticed the way Dr. Barnes avoided complex medical jargon when the nurses weren't around. He noticed the way he seemed more interested in the theater of being a doctor than the actual science of it. 3 weeks after the funeral, Rick sat in the clinic office after hours. The silence was heavy. He picked up the phone and called the medical board in Sacramento. I need to verify the credentials of a Dr. Gerald Barnes, Rick said, his voice low. I'd like a copy of his identification and license faxed down to the clinic. We're updating our records. Of course, the clerk said. An hour later, the fax machine began to groan. Rick stood over it, watching the image emerge inch by inch from the thermal paper. First, the top of a head, then a face. Rick felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. The man in the photograph was tall, with a strong jaw and a shock of silver hair. He looked nothing like the likable little guy who was currently running the clinic. The address on the license was in Stockton, 400 miles to the north. Rick stared at the two realities. The real Dr. Gerald Barnes was an orthopedic surgeon in Northern California. The man sitting in the office down the hall was a ghost, a fraud, a monster who had played a role so well that a man had died for it. Who are you? Rick whispered to the empty room. The answer would come soon enough. The man wasn't Gerald Barnes. He was Gerald Barnbaum, a pharmacist from Chicago with a history of Medicaid fraud and a failed acting career. He had simply looked up a name in a medical directory, requested a duplicate license by claiming he was opening a new clinic, and the system built on trust had handed him the keys to the kingdom. Chapter 4: The Chicago Script. To understand the man who called himself Dr. Barnes, one had to look back to the gray streets of Chicago in the mid-70s. Gerald Barnbaum was not born a doctor, but he was born an actor. In college, he was the star of the theater department, a man who could inhabit any skin as long as there were lights and an audience. But the stage didn't pay the bills, and so Gerald found himself behind a pharmacy counter. It was a life of meticulous boredom. He counted pills, checked dosages, and watched the real doctors, the men in the white coats, walk with a stride he envied. To Gerald, the pharmacist was just a supporting character. He wanted the lead. In 1975, the law caught him for the first time. He had been running a Medicaid scam, a complex web of fraudulent billings that turned government funds into personal profit. He was acquitted by a jury of final. Brilliant performance in the courtroom, but the victory was hollow. The Illinois Board of Pharmacy revoked his license. He was a man without a script, and so he decided to write a new one. He moved to California, a land where people go to reinvent themselves. He didn't just want to be a pharmacist again. He wanted to be the man who signed the prescriptions. He opened a medical directory and found a name that was close enough to his own, Dr. Gerald Barnes. He called the medical board. He practiced the voice confident, slightly weary, the tone of a busy physician. "I'm Dr. Barnes up in Stockton," he told them. "I'm opening a clinic in Los Angeles, and I seem to have misplaced my duplicate license. Could you send a copy to my new office?" The board, assuming a doctor wouldn't lie about being a doctor, sent the papers. With those documents, Gerald Barnbaum ceased to exist. Dr. Gerald Barnes was born. Chapter 5. The Wedding Vows of a Ghost. The law caught up with Barnbaum in 1980. He was arrested for murder, though the charge was later reduced to manslaughter and practicing medicine without a license. He pleaded guilty, a move of calculated cowardice, and was sentenced to 3 years. But for a man like Gerald Barnbaum, prison was just a temporary intermission. When he was released 18 months later for good behavior, he didn't go back to pharmacy. He didn't try to find honest work. He walked out of the prison gates, put on a new lab coat, and became Dr. Gerald Barnes all over again. By 1995, he had perfected the act. He was the medical director of a high-end clinic in Los Angeles, earning a six-figure salary. And he had found something he had never had before: a wife. Lisa Roberts thought she had found the perfect man. Gerald was romantic. He bought her flowers for no reason. He took her to concerts and fine dinners. He was a doctor, a man of status and healing. "He swept me off my feet," Lisa would later recall, her voice trembling. "I was planning our future. I wanted children. I wanted to help him start his own private practice. I thought I knew him. I thought I knew the man I shared a bed with every night. But she didn't know his real name. She didn't know his real age. She didn't know that every morning, when he kissed her goodbye and said he was going to save lives, he was actually heading to a clinic where he was playing Russian roulette with every patient he saw. The facade began to crumble at a Christmas party in 1996. It was a crowded, festive event. The air was thick with the smell of pine and expensive perfume. Gerald was there, looking every bit the successful physician, a name tag pinned to his lapel. "Hi, I'm Dr. Barnes." Across the room, a man froze. Rick D'Alessandro hadn't seen Barnbaum in 16 years. But you don't forget the face of the man who killed a patient under your watch. Rick walked through the crowd, his heart drumming a war beat in his chest. He stopped in front of the doctor. "Gerald," Rick said. Barnbaum looked up. For a split second, the mask slipped. The charm vanished, replaced by the raw, naked terror of a cornered animal. But then the actor returned. He smiled, a thin, oily thing. "Rick, How are you, old friend? I'm not